In the quiet rooms of London's Reform Club lives a man who plans his life down to the minute, almost to the second. His name is Phileas Fogg. No one knows his past. No one has ever seen him chatting with a friend. Yet everyone in the club claims you could set your watch by his comings and goings. One evening, over an article in the newspaper, his fellow club members argue about how small the world has become. Fogg, calmly, claims he could travel around the entire globe in 80 days. His friends laugh. Then a wager is struck. £20,000, only 80 days allowed, and no turning back. Fogg checks his watch, stands up, and boards a train that very evening without so much as packing a spare shirt. Can this famously cold, precise man really circle the world in time? Or is this about to become the most expensive mistake of his life? Here's the story.
Let us meet the author. Jules Verne was born in 1828 in the French city of Nantes. His father sent him to Paris to study law, but the young Verne's real passion was theater and writing. In Paris, he met the man who would define the rest of his career, the publisher Pierre-Jules Hetzel, who recognized the potential in Verne's blend of science, geography, and adventure, and entered into a long-running partnership with him. Out of that partnership came an enormous series of novels called The Extraordinary Voyages. Verne often described places he himself had never visited, drawing instead on hours spent in libraries, poring over geography books, maps, scientific journals, and newspaper reports. For him, writing a novel was almost an act of research. He closely followed the technological leaps of his era, railways, steamships, the telegraph, and wove the way these inventions were shrinking the world directly into his fiction. Around the World in 80 Days grew directly out of that fascination. The book began appearing as a serial in a Paris newspaper called Le Temps in 1872. Throughout his career, Verne was a disciplined, regimented writer, sitting down to his desk at fixed hours nearly every day without fail, not unlike the clockwork life of his own creation, Phileas Fogg. Later in life, he owned his own yacht and took real voyages along the coasts of Europe. But at the time he wrote Around the World in 80 Days, he had not personally circled the globe. He built every leg of the journey at his desk, among his books. He died in 1805 in the French city of Amiens.
So what actually happens in the book? That very evening, without wasting a moment, Fogg leaves London, taking with him his newly hired French valet, Passepartout. Passepartout had taken the job hoping for a quiet life, serving a calm, punctual master with predictable hours, and is stunned to learn, on his very first day, that his employer is setting off around the world. Meanwhile, another story is shaking London. A large sum of money has recently been stolen from the Bank of England, and the police have found no trace of the thief. A detective named Fix notices Fogg's sudden, unexplained departure abroad, carrying a large amount of cash, and grows suspicious. Fix begins tailing Fogg, but cannot arrest him immediately since he has no warrant, and must wait until they reach British colonial territory where one can be obtained. So the book runs as two parallel chases at once. Fogg races against the clock, while Fix looks for ways to delay him, slow him down, and hold him just long enough for the law to catch up. Fogg and Passepartout sail to Suez, then travel on to India. There they find a stretch where the railway has not yet been completed, and are forced to continue by hiring an elephant. Making their way through the forest, they stumble upon preparations for a local ritual in which a young widow is to be burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre. Her name is Auda. Fogg sets aside his schedule, his wager, his careful plan, and decides to rescue her, organizing a daring raid with his small party. It is one of the most tense scenes in the book, because up to this point, Fogg has seemed bound only to his watch and his calculations, almost without feeling. And here, for the first time, we see him risk something far more important than time, willing to give up both his schedule and his money for it. From this point on, Auda joins them and becomes part of the journey. The route continues from Calcutta to Hong Kong, then to Yokohama, and finally across to the American continent. At every stop, a new obstacle appears: missed ships, delayed trains, an attack on the train as it crosses the empty plains of America, reckless risks taken to cross a bridge on the verge of collapse. Sometimes a snowstorm, sometimes an unfinished stretch of railway, sometimes an unexpected delay at a port threatens the careful hours Fogg has calculated down to the minute. Fix occasionally seems to help, but is still, underneath it all, chasing his goal of turning Fogg over to the law, and at times his own scheming puts the journey in even greater danger. As the calendar pages run out, whether Fogg reaches London within 80 days, whether he wins the fortune wagered by his friends at the club, and whether Fix's suspicions turn out to be correct, all remain unresolved until the final pages of the book. I will not tell you what happens in those last few days, or the unexpected miscalculation that changes everything, or how the journey finally ends, because what makes this novel so beloved is living through that final, nail-biting tension yourself.
Around the World in 80 Days captured, ahead of almost anyone else, the growing sense that the world was actually shrinking. In the second half of the 19th century, railways were linking continents together, and steamships were crossing oceans faster than ever before. Verne took that technological optimism and turned it into an adventure built on the idea that an ordinary person could genuinely now travel around the entire globe. The book is still read today because the question it asks has not gone stale. As technology keeps shrinking the world, are we actually growing any closer to one another? Fogg's icy composure, Passepartout's warmth, Auda's courage, and Fix's stubborn suspicion present four different human types at once, capturing both the thrill and the anxiety of an accelerating age. The novel went on to inspire nearly every race around the world story, and every against-the-clock adventure that followed it for the next century and a half. Even today, whenever we calculate the fastest possible route somewhere, or watch news travel to the other side of the planet within seconds, we are living inside a far faster version of the shrinking world Verne imagined in the 19th century. The book sensed, remarkably early, that technology liberates people, even as it subjects them to a new kind of pressure, the pressure of the—
Here is a true story. 17 years after the novel was published, an American journalist named Nellie Bly decided to actually repeat Fogg's journey in real life. Traveling alone by ship and by train, she circled the globe in just 72 days, breaking Fogg's fictional record. During her trip, she is known to have visited Verne himself in France. Here is another interesting detail. When the novel was first serialized, sources from the period frequently describe readers following the newspaper installments placing real bets on whether Fogg would actually win his wager. Verne's idea of an 80-day trip around the world was not pulled out of thin air either. The opening of the Suez Canal, new railway lines stretching across the American continent, and the expanding rail network in India, all converging in the second half of the 19th century, suddenly made a journey that would have seemed impossible only a few decades earlier genuinely realistic. As an avid newspaper reader following these developments, Verne became one of the first to turn that very idea into a novel. Finally, since the novel was originally written in French, the English text we read today is a translation, and it is a well-known point among Verne scholars that many of the earliest English translations of his work were long criticized for straying from the fidelity of the original text. We have covered Around the World in 80 Days, but if you want to find out how Fogg manages, or fails, to make it back in time, whether Fix's suspicions turn out to be right, and what happens to Auda, you will find the link to the full audiobook in the description. This is a classic that rewards listening one stop at a time, rather than in a single sitting. You can find the rest of the Verne Classic series on this channel. Subscribe for more videos. Until the next one, think like Phileas Fogg. Time can always run differently than it appears to.